This is The Wrap on Aging, and I'm Rob Ence, your host with the Utah Commission on Aging, broadcasting from Scope Radio. The Wrap on Aging explains public policy, education, and research that informs and empowers Utah's older adults. And it connects you and your family to important resources and services. We live in earthquake country, and geologists have warned us for years. Too many people have experienced floods, fires, mudslides, hurricanes, tornadoes, tsunamis, power outages, food and water shortages. Unforgiving disasters. This podcast addresses why Utahns and older adults everywhere must plan and prepare for emergencies. They will occur, not if, but when. We'll recount real stories and the impact of people's lives and talk to an expert about how to prepare for and manage a disaster. On Saturday, January 13th, 2018, at 8:07 a.m. Hawaii time, the following alert was issued on the emergency and commercial mobile alert systems over television, radio, and cell phones in Hawaii. Emergency alert. Ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. My colleague, Barb Stanton, AERP State Director for Hawaii, recalls that strange morning. Barb, good morning. Aloha.
Aloha.
How did the people respond in Hawaii when this alert came out?
I think there was just sheer disbelief, and some people just didn't get the message because it came on cell phone, but no other communication device or sirens or radio or TV. So some people just saw crowds of people just running for the hills, literally, and they got caught up in the panic. So I would say that if you're outside your house and you didn't know and you didn't have any protection, you were looking for anything. And that's why you saw pictures of one parent luring his child into a manhole and people just trying to get in. One reporter told me she tried to get into the department store and they closed the doors. So people were just panicked if they were out in the public. I think if you were at home, there was less panic.
So I can imagine, because Hawaii at any point in time has a large number of visitors and tourists, what kind of guidance is offered to individuals who don't have a place as a residence there?
You know, the interesting thing is that the tourism industry was actually more prepared than the community. On average, we have about 1.4 million residents, and we have about 8 million tourists a year. And the hotels are used to having people go to the safe floors, and they have enough food. So the hotels were fine, except for tourists who are not in the hotel. So that is a problem, because then you depend on the public communication system. So, but the public, and particularly the seniors, so your topic is so relevant, Rob, the public really was not prepared. Usually we are prepared for things like a tsunami coming, a hurricane, but when you get a notice that in 15 minutes the state will be attacked, you don't have enough time to prepare. And that's when they found out that Hawaii's residents did not know where to go. If they did get to a shelter, the shelters were not prepared. We didn't have enough food, and there was just mass chaos.
You have multiple tsunami warnings over the years, and that's something you're a little more used to preparing for. This was clearly an unorthodox alert. And in the report that followed, it was indicated there was really no message prepared to cut off the false alarm. So it almost took 40 minutes before the message was cleared, which I'm sure added to the public dismay. The plan seemed to lack the clear directions for sheltering and county coordination. And so the governor apparently ordered some work to be done to better prepare for the future. So what do you think the state needs to do in order to prepare for future emergency alerts?
Well, I think that the governor just asked for $2 million to do an assessment and to shore up where we have points of vulnerability. And I think what we need to do is have an education program where we make sure that everybody knows where to go. Everybody, especially seniors, knows the essential supplies that they'll need. And what happens if they're cut off by power? What if it happens if they need special medications? What happens if they need help to evacuate? So there has to be a community system set up. That's on the public side. On the infrastructural side, we will have to have backup for power. We will have to have a fast action team that can repair harbors, because 90% of the food and materials come into Hawaii. It's all imported. So if the harbors or the airports are destroyed, you're talking about a massive problem in Hawaii, which is the most isolated landmass in the world.
You know, we witnessed to some degree what happened with Puerto Rico during the hurricane season, and can imagine a similar scenario for Hawaii. Well, Barb, thank you very much for sharing this information. We hope that you never experience an alert like that ever again, and we appreciate you taking time with us. Mahalo and aloha.
Mahalo, and thank you for bringing up this important topic, Rob.
Talk soon. Thank you. You are listening to the Rap on Aging podcast from Scope Radio. I'm your host, Rob Ence, with the Utah Commission on Aging, and today we're talking about older adults preparing for an emergency. We've asked Ed Blake, the Executive Director of Salt Lake Valley Habitat for Humanity, to join us today. Welcome, Ed.
Thanks for having me.
Ed is a native of Utah and a lifetime advocate for decent and affordable housing for the less privileged. But he's also an expert on disaster planning here in the state of Utah. Ed serves as the president for VOAD, Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster. Ed, tell us a little bit about this incredible group of volunteer organizations.
You know, Rob, when you think about disasters, one thing to comprehend is just the fact that there's not enough surge capacity in our emergency services. So voluntary organizations active in disaster includes Red Cross. It includes local faith groups. It includes Habitat for Humanity. We come alongside those groups and help in the event of a disaster. And so voluntary organizations practice basically monthly. We make sure that we're coming alongside the services in the course of a disaster, and we try to stay well prepared in the event of a disaster.
Is that part of a national organization?
Yes. And there are VOADs all across the country, but we are part of a national organization, which would be a national VOAD, basically.
In July of 2017, heavy rain overwhelmed the storm drains along the Wasatch Front. Homes, schools, libraries were flooded, closing numerous low-lying intersections. Laura Briefer of Salt Lake Department of Public Utilities reported that this sudden occurrence and intensity of the storm is a 200-year event in Salt Lake City. Some areas of Salt Lake experienced more than 2 inches of water in just a few hours, according to the news release. Hardest hit were the neighborhoods in Sugar House, near Smith's Ballpark, and along the Jordan River, where several dozen homes were flooded. What did you see during that time? What were people experiencing?
Well, in addition to those areas, the low area of the valley also got flooded. In other words, the water from the hillsides moved down, and in the lower areas, we had basements that were completely full of water. One gentleman had just bought his house that week, and he said the water was to the top of the stairs, going down into the basement. That's unfortunate timing, of course.
He didn't plan on an indoor swimming pool quite so quickly.
Yes. One thing that occurred is there were roughly 100 homes that were involved in that disaster. It whittled down quickly to about 35, 40 that needed some sort of long-term recovery help. And that's where organizations like ours stepped in, tried to help with those. But this was a small disaster.
Right.
This was tiny in comparison. And we had our hiccups, quite frankly. The other thing is, when we have these type of disasters, we move to low tech. I'm going to talk about that a couple times today. We communicated with many of these homeowners via door hangers. And so when you think about a disaster, think about the fact that we're going to go to low tech pretty quickly on trying to communicate. So we communicated via these door hangers. We invited them to attend a MARC, which is a Multi-Agency Resource Center. This is a place that you go where you have everyone around the room. You have Red Cross in that room. You have Habitat in that room. You have county services in that room. The idea is it's one-stop shopping for someone that was affected in that flood. This will happen on any disaster occurrence. We'll probably be setting up marks for people to go to with door hangers that tell you how to get there.
So we're talking just about a regular door hanger from a cleaner, like a clothes hanger.
We are.
And what did that indicate?
So if TV is up, if communications are up, that's one way that they'll learn about how to go to a mark. But we found door hangers, if they had left the residence, they came back to it and they learned about how to get resources basically that would help them.
Interesting. So what are the financial implications? Even though this was a small disaster on the scale of what we saw in Texas and Florida, what are the financial implications to individuals who are impacted?
So I followed Hurricane Harvey into Texas. And what I found out about insurance is sometimes it's not what we think it is. In Texas, let's say you had $100,000 worth of damage to your home. The insurance company would come in and say, okay, we are going to run the materials through depreciation. This was a new event for me. This 2x4 that costs $2 is now $1. This base molding, everything, sheetrock. Here's your check for $50,000 for your $100,000 worth of with problems. And then you have a $20,000 deductible. So here's $30,000. This is a family that used to work at let's say the grocery store that is no longer there or operational. So they're unemployed and they're holding a check. What are they going to spend that check on? Are you going to fix your house back up, or are you going to be worried about how you're going to feed yourself?
Right.
What it did is it vapor locked a lot of homeowners. So the first thing I want to say about finances is please go review your insurance policy. You need to understand how it's going to work. You need to be resilient as far as finances as well. And in cooperation with that, see what services are available from these institutions that'll be at the mark. And that's what it's for. Find out how you can plug in, basically, to help become more resilient after the fact.
The experience with individuals going to the mark, has there been feedback in terms of what individuals learned and how they were able to apply the information they learned there?
Yeah, so what we did is it was beneficial for us because we gathered information and we could look to the agency that was best suited to help that family. Sometimes that'll be Habitat, sometimes it'll be Red Cross, and so on. So it helps us on that side. And the other thing is there's much more efficiency to that on getting the right agency aligned with the family that needs the help.
But what's clear here is individuals, just because they have a policy or they think they understand what might happen, they really need to think through the implications of how all this could play out if the worst happened.
Absolutely.
You're listening to the Rap on Aging podcast from Scope Radio. I'm your host, Rob Ence with the Utah Commission on Aging, and today we are talking about older adults and how they need to prepare for an emergency. If you have any questions about this issue or suggestions on topics you'd like to talk to us about, please send us an email to utahaging@gmail.com, and be sure to check out our website at www.ucoa.utah.edu and follow us on Facebook. We're talking with Ed Blake, Executive Director of Salt Lake Valley Habitat for Humanity and one of our state's premier disaster planning experts. At least one widely respected broadcast journalist has found evidence that Utah is better prepared than any other state in the union. In his best-selling book, Lights Out, Ted Koppel devotes 3 chapters to the Utah and what the LDS Church has invested in disaster planning and preparation, both the institutions of the church and what's expected of church members. He writes, "The LDS Church has set world-class standards for disaster preparedness and imbued its membership with a sense of individual and group responsibility. Its strategists have established a communications network that would survive anything short of a nuclear attack." So, Ed, what do you think about Koppel's comments in terms of our preparation in the state and particularly the major dominant religion's influence on helping prepare?
So, as we've been involved in these exercises here locally, We actually have different ratios for Utah that are different than the rest of the country on housing. The FEMA has put out different numbers for Utah because we are a community that looks after one another, and we tend to know one another. And so the belief is that many families will shelter with other families that have an operational house and so on. And the numbers are actually different for Utah than they are anywhere else in the country. The one thing that when I'm talking to groups that I say at the front end of speaking is, no one is coming for you. No one is coming for you.
What does that mean as an older adult?
What it means is if you think that we're going to have an earthquake event and you're going to have an ambulance in front of your building in the next 10 minutes, it's not going to happen. We encourage you to be resilient for 72 hours. And there's no guarantee that even then you're going to have someone there. And so the community itself has to become self-resilient. There's a program in Salt Lake County that's moving out into the community called Safe Neighborhoods. The idea here is basically that every one of the 143 elementary schools in Salt Lake County has a yellow-orange sign on the front that says Safe Neighborhoods. And in that school somewhere is a kit that the neighborhood could come together. They open up that kit. It has FEMA maps of each street. You can. It has a organizational chart. You basically put the organizational chart on the wall and you say, does anyone have medical experience? And someone raises their hand, they say, I was a nurse. And on the org chart, your name is going on the org chart. You're now in charge of medical until a doctor shows up. They will send out groups to try to see every home, and if there's still someone there that needs help. In other words, this kit takes you through the whole resiliency program of how does a neighborhood stand up and become resilient.
So in reflecting back on the conversation we had from Hawaii, one of the things that came out in the report is that while individuals were directed to elementary schools, they discovered that the schools did not have the preparation necessary to receive individuals had this attack played out. How far are we along in Salt Lake City with the Safe Neighborhoods concept? Is that something that can be executed right now?
So Safe Neighborhoods is not designed to be a shelter. It's designed to help with resiliency. And so there will be other shelters that become available, but it's your elementary school is a gathering place to understand what's going on in your neighborhood. And all reunification will be from elementary school to elementary school. So if you're at work and your family is somewhere else in the valley, it's elementary school to elementary school is going to be the reunification that they're going to try to put back together. And so we need to understand how to become resilient because no one is coming for you.
So this would be a place where individuals can go for information, where logistics may be organized, your skills may be called upon, but then there will be other places where individuals would go for literally a safe haven. How does this apply to food and water supplies?
And see, that's where it starts getting difficult. We practice for this all the time. Probably the 800-pound gorilla for feeding is Red Cross. And so a lot of the initial work that's going to come in is going to be from the Red Cross. And they're exercising on these feeding strategies all the time. As we look at the migration of people affected by a disaster, we will move them from shelter that is small. You will be moving them into bigger and bigger shelters as time goes on. For instance, the convention center, for instance, that's in Sandy will become a shelter if it's still standing. That's the other thing is it's a moving target. You've got to figure out what's still there and what's operational.
Right. So it happens, I can't say case-by-case basis, but ultimately there's an assessment, and then information is shared at the elementary school of where people can go.
Correct.
So there are unique challenges to older adults, particularly immobile, vulnerable older adults. Let's talk a little bit about some of the issues specific to them that make even them getting to an elementary school a challenge.
So a couple things. One is I think that we walk around with this idea in our heads that a couple things. One is that there's a blue sky and there's sun shining. Our last exercise occurred on December 1st with 2 feet of snow on the ground. And as I talk through this, I want people to think about it's December 1st, it's 10 degrees outside, and there's snow on the ground. So you need to put your mind in that framework first. One of the things that we can do is basically come up with a neighborhood plan. Or in my case, where I live in a high-rise condo, is come up with a condo plan and see if we can get the younger people helping the older people, making sure that they get out and that they're safe as well.
When you said no one is coming for you, those can be haunting words to an older adult. I think in our community, because we are well connected, there is a lot of thought that, well, my family can help me or my kids will rescue me. Fact of the matter is those kids may be 30 minutes away. They may have their own issues. They may have damage. And the concept of having this network in the neighborhood is so crucial because if they don't have that, literally nobody will be coming for them.
So let me give you a scary example. During this December 1st earthquake exercise, with the snow on the ground and such, I-15 pancaked. There was no operational hospital on the east side. When the fault fell, it fell 10 feet. So if you were driving from where we are right now, you would hit a 10-foot cliff eventually. There was no surviving bridge over the Jordan River. Closest you could get coming from the north was the northern end of Ogden. You could get to the base of the Parley's Canyon, and Nephi was a stopping point on the other. So when you say our children are a half hour away, in this exercise, every 4 hours is a day. By my estimation of where I was and where my wife was, it was 6 days before I could get to her. What this did is it pushed forward a conversation that her and I had to have of not only are they not coming for you, but I'm not coming for you. And we had to change our strategy so that she thought about these in terms of how would she be resilient in the absence of me being there and vice versa, me being resilient in the absence of her. And we need to think about it on those terms.
You've used the word resilient a lot. That's a code term for disaster preparedness. Let's talk a little more specifically what that means to be resilient.
So for Christmas this year, we bought all of our family members what I would call a Go Pack. A Go Pack is basically a backpack that you put resiliency items in. And so this would be water and food. You might put your medications in there. I have a change of clothes in that backpack. I have solar devices that will charge my devices. And I think that what we wanted was for all of our children to at least have a little backpack that made them resilient for 48 hours. Here's another thing. We also included a little card that had our phone numbers on it. I don't know about you, but if I lost my phone, I have no idea what my children's phone numbers are. That's the world we live in today. So when I talk about going to a much lower tech in a disaster, have something where you all know each other's contact information and it's not on your phones. You may not have your phone.
What happens, though, when we've become so dependent upon cell phones and cell towers go down? And you talk about low tech. That's not low tech.
No. The other thing is when that technology comes back up, for a period of time, you'll only be able to use text. Here's another thing that I want to add to this. You need, as a family, to have an idea and a plan for where you're going to go and communicate with each other. My family has chose the Red Cross Safe and Well site. So as we look at communications coming back up, I believe Red Cross will be probably one of the first places that it comes back up, and I hope it's part of the neighborhood resiliency as well. You'll be able to go on there and say, I'm safe and well. And if you were traveling in Europe as a family member, you can go on that site and you can see, oh, my father is safe and well. And so we've decided that's where we're going. And I would encourage people to have a pre-plan of where are we going to go? How are we going to communicate with each other while we're in a panic to find out if our loved ones are okay. And I would get ahead of that.
You have outlined some very critical steps. Let me ask if you have a website or a place where individuals could go find materials that will summarize some of the things we've talked about.
So Red Cross has actually got a number of elements on their website, I think, that you can go to understand disaster resiliency. I think that's a good place to start. I talked about a Go Pack. We bought ours at Recreation Outlet, and they were $39. You can't fill that pack for the things that are in it for $39. And so I would suggest getting a Go Pack started, put it in your trunk, keep the food in there and check on it every so many years, and make it yours. Make it absolutely yours. And so when I speak to a group, I actually pull out a flask of Jameson Scotch and said, mine has a flask in it. Okay, that's mine. It might not be yours, but you might put something else in there. It might be a good book that you thought, if I'm ever in a disaster, I'm going to read this book. But make it yours and get a starting point and get a Go Pack and get it in the trunk of your car so it travels with you wherever you go.
So this whole idea of resiliency is how to navigate and survive a disaster. Takes preparation beforehand, helps you know where to go, have some minimal things personalized to cope, and have a place that you can connect by communication as well as location.
Absolutely.
You're listening to the Rap on Aging podcast from Scope Radio. I'm your host, Rob Ence, with the Utah Commission on Aging, and today we're talking about preparing for an emergency. Ed, so back to the conversation about individuals who are primarily 65 and older. We have the largest or fastest growing demographic of that age group almost in the country. And again, we have unique considerations. You talked about battery packs. There are medications. There may be oxygen supplies. Are there any other things that you would share in helping us prepare how to manage as older adults, or if we're helping vulnerable adults?
So keeping warm is a huge consideration for people of older age. So I need, again, for you to think about this. The sun is not shining. Think about it as a blizzard outside. So one thing I would like our older demographic to lean into is, how am I going to keep warm? My backpack has hand warmers in it, and it also has the solar blankets, and it also has, and my wife is cold basically at anything under 75 degrees, and so I think her pack has nothing in it but things to keep her warm. Think about how you're going to keep warm. Also think about your agility. Think about, how am I going to get to where I need to go? And if your agility isn't such that you're going to get there, I think you need to develop a plan for, can I find someone that would help me in that event? And I think that once we get you to a place where there are services, part of VOAD and so on, that are there and they're well trained to take care of the older demographic. We got to get you there, though.
Many individuals find themselves making decisions later in life of where to live. Many try to age in place. Some pick assisted living. Others, more advanced nursing requirements are there. If you were looking for a place for a parent to stay, a loved one to stay, what are some of the questions you would ask of those facilities to assure yourself that they have a plan for emergency? We don't have to look too far back in our history, Katrina and other places, where older adults were abandoned when disaster struck.
So the first bright line is reinforced masonry. Unreinforced masonry is going to be one of our key problems in Salt Lake City proper, because the homes were built so long ago. I lived near where we're at right now in an old Tudor that was built in 1929 before moving to the condo. And to my core, I believe that house will come down. So we have, as we look at this, we've got to consider reinforced masonry. Make sure the building is such that it will survive in the case of an earthquake. There's never any guarantee, of course, but the reality is you can lean into that. So a number of things I would look for is, the elevator is not going to work in a high rise. You're going to be going down the stairs. I mean, all of these components you need to look at as far as what it's going to take to get you to a safe place.
Thanks again to our guest today. This has been a terrific conversation and wonderful information shared. Thanks to you all for listening. If you have any questions about this issue or suggestions on topics you'd like to talk to us about, please send us an email to utahaging@gmail.com, and be sure to check out our website at www.ucoa.utah.edu and follow us on Facebook. I'm Rob Ence, Executive Director for the Utah Commission on Aging, and this has been The Rap on Aging.